Joining us today on Binge, Jessica Gao, head writer, executive producer of She-Hulk, attorney at law. New episodes airing Thursdays on Disney+. Jessica, it's great to have you. Thank you so much for the time today.
Thanks for having me.
I think the first question, obviously, given how hungry people are for MCU content, is just what it's like sort of entering that universe after, I guess, multiple attempts of pitching stuff. Tell me about that story, how the relationship began.
Well, I mean, thanks for not specifying that it was multiple failed attempts, first of all. I mean, it really was a dream come true because after so many attempts, at a certain point, you start to feel like maybe this isn't going to happen, maybe it wasn't meant to be. So when it did happen, truly like the last 3 years has felt very surreal. And also to get to this point has felt completely surreal.
Yeah, why were you so intent on making it work? Were you a longtime fan? Did you grow up with the comics? And did you have existing relationships with them that just hadn't turned into real deals?
No existing relationships, but I was a longtime fan of the MCU specifically. I grew up reading comics. But when Marvel started making movies, I felt like they kind of blew all other superhero movies out of the water, and I was just such a huge fan. I watched every movie, opening weekend, Thursday night at midnight. And my goal really, I was a TV writer, but my goal was I want to write a Marvel movie. That's what I love. That's what's exciting to me. I just loved what they did with these movies. And so, that's really where it came from. And She-Hulk was from within Marvel Comics, She-Hulk was my favorite character. And, but they kind of choose the project they want to do, and then they kind of go out to writers. So it wasn't like I could just go into them and say I've decided you guys are going to make a She-Hulk movie now. So that's why, the first couple of attempts were them coming to me and saying this is the movie we're going to make now. Show us what you would do with it, pitch us. And for each of those, I pitched them. But honestly, even my very first time pitching to them, my very first meeting with anybody at Marvel was with Brad Winterbaum. And I brought up She-Hulk just because she was my favorite. And, I was obviously fishing to see if they had any plans. And he told me I was the first person to ever bring up She-Hulk, which both excited me, but also made me feel like, oh no, what's going to happen?
Maybe I'm onto something.
Yeah, and then it was years before they announced that, 3 failed attempts later, and years later they announced they were doing a She-Hulk TV show, and I was like, oh man, this is it. TV is my wheelhouse. I can't imagine anyone else has been loudly banging on the She-Hulk door at that studio, as much as me. So it kind of just felt like everything aligned, and I'd warned them multiple times that if they ever did anything with She-Hulk, they had to call me or else I would commit arson against them.
So that's interesting. So as someone who was obviously a keen observer of MCU from the outside, right, and read the original material, talk about what it was like to sort of move inside and have those books opened up in terms of how their process works.
What really surprised me was from the initial stages, how much freedom I got, because, I imagined that because it's such a tightly controlled universe and it's so connected, that of course there would be a lot of boundaries. You're probably going to be reined into this very small pen. But that really surprised me that at the very beginning, Kevin Feige was always just, give me a good idea, think outside the box. And it might also have something to do with the fact that because I'm entering the MCU so late, they've already done so much stuff that they are now open to, exploring different avenues and areas that they previously hadn't tread into. And so, I really could just do whatever. And also, what's the worst that could happen? They just say, no, you can't do that. Think of something else. So it just felt kind of it felt like a safe environment to kind of just explore ideas. And, Kevin did such he was so great about pushing me too, to kind of step outside of what I thought would be constraints. And for this show specifically, because the format is a legal comedy, and it means that built into the show is a lot of lawsuits, a lot of, trials. It kind of naturally created this need to bring in other characters from the other movies and the comics. You know, it was the format really worked for bringing in the rest of the universe into this project.
Right. That's interesting. I mean, I think already the first few weeks here, what's getting the most buzz is not just obviously the casting is amazing, and the actors that you've landed, which we'll talk about, are incredible. Bringing back Tim Roth, Ruffalo, obviously, and Tatiana, who's incredible. But also your own inspirations for sort of the tone, right? I mean, I've been told you referenced Fleabag in some early conversations about how you wanted it to sound.
Yes, yes. Because the tone of, you know, for any comedy, like the tone is so important. There's so many different types of humor, and it can really go so many different ways. And the two shows that I referenced when I pitched the show were Fleabag and Better Call Saul. You know, Fleabag because it was just such a beautiful, wonderful, raw portrait of this like human being, you know, who like this woman with all these struggles and was just so open with everything that she was and everything that she was dealing with. And then of course the obvious, which is the fourth wall breaks. I've always loved fourth wall breaks, you know, and I love how like there's this intimacy with fourth wall breaks between the main character and the audience, you know, and on our show, we really use the fourth wall break as like a way for Jen, for She-Hulk, to treat the audience as like her little friend, her, you know, you watching, you're her secret little friend that she divulges certain things that are very interior to her that she doesn't really say to anyone else within her world. And then of course, Better Call Saul, like, because it's such a brilliant, like, you know, lawyer show. But what we really liked about Better Call Saul too was that like so much of the interesting stuff was happening outside of the courtroom, you know, and also how that informs what happens in the courtroom. Like the stuff outside of the courtroom is just as important, if not more important, than what goes into the courtroom.
I think that's interesting, especially since, and I know you've made this point a couple of times, is that the character herself is such a touchstone for how identity works, especially in the workplace, right? How others view you, and in this case, it's highly physical, but that emotional connection to, in this case, the viewer, sort of relates to that that vulnerability, I guess.
Yes, absolutely. You know, because she is the most, when she's She-Hulk, she is one of the most powerful beings on earth. And yet she still is beholden to a boss, you know, she's still beholden to the HR department. She still has to show up on time and do her job. And she has to do it all with a lot of public scrutiny and a lot of scrutiny from everyone at work, because she sticks out. You know, there's no way to hide the fact that she is this giant, green, powerful woman with a very famous cousin who's just moving through this corporate environment trying to file documents.
That's interesting. When viewers look at, I'm just looking at the library here of Disney Plus MCU, the Lokis, the What Ifs, the Ms. Marvels, the Moon Knights, the Hawkeyes. Is there a thread, or is there an effort to make each incremental series something that stands on its own?
Well, speaking only from our show's perspective, like it really felt like we were allowed to kind of do our own thing and kind of carve out our own little corner of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. But of course, with everything in the MCU, like all roads lead to and come from Kevin. So, you know, I have to believe he has like a master plan for everything. But for us, like we really felt kind of the freedom and the excitement and the support to really kind of create our own niche and do a thing that hasn't been done before in the MCU.
Right. Let's talk a little bit about some industry dynamics. You know, there's this conception, and we actually talked about this with Danny Strong the other day about Dope Sick. There's this idea that, oh, you're a scriptwriter, you're a showrunner, you're an EP, you're in Hollywood, and they're all these big new players in media. They need content. They've got deep pockets. It must be a seller's market. It must be easy to get your project bought. He pushed back on that with us the other day, and I know you've said as a writer, it's not as easy as it sounds.
It really isn't. Yes, there are so many different outlets now, so it's nice that you have choices, but like there's never any sort of guarantee that something's going to get made, just because I think that's the big misconception, is that just because something gets bought doesn't mean that it gets made. Like most things that are bought don't get made. And it's a gamble because, you know, you might go around and pitch a bunch of things and you get multiple offers and you're like, oh my God, a bidding war, everybody loves me, everybody wants this, this is great. But then you have to not only like think about like, what am I getting out of this, but also out of each offer, but you also have to think, what are the chances that this is actually going to reach an audience? Because you might be developing it for a year or 2 years or even 3 years, and then they decide like, we're not going to move forward, and you just spent all this time and you sold this thing that is like your baby, and after a while they just decide, no, we don't want it anymore, we're not going to make it, and it's heartbreaking. There's nothing you can do about it, you know. And then there's constant regime changes at places, so the person who was championing your stuff might not make it to the finish line with you and might not be there to kind of help push you through the finish line. So there's truly no guarantees, and so in that sense, nothing feels like a done deal.
Right. You add another layer onto that, and that is if you're writing for television, where episodes are shorter than, say, an original movie, you're dealing with a discount just right there from the start.
Yeah, absolutely. Because the shorter episode orders, that means less time that you're working, which means less pay, you know. Whether you're getting paid a weekly rate or an episodic rate, just less episodes just mean less time working and getting paid for it. Whereas, you know, back in the day, the years of 22 episode orders are pretty much gone completely now. And back then, a 22 episode order meant you worked for almost the entire year, and that can sustain you. Whereas now it's like, you know, for a 10 episode order, you're probably working, as a staff writer, you're probably working like 20 weeks, which means, you know, you either have to learn how to live off of 20 weeks of pay, or you're going to have to fill your year with multiple shows in order to just piece together a living.
Right. As for actors, I mean, clearly Disney Plus is not having trouble attracting major talent. Some of them related to the universe in the past, some new to it. Do you get a sense that those actors, they're still, they want to be purist and appear only in theatrical releases, or the migration to streaming and television continues as it has for the past few years?
I think it really varies from actor to actor, because I think some feel that way, and I think there are others that like enjoy kind of the schedule and of TV, but also the fact that in TV, you know, because it's so character based and you get to live with this character for so long, that you really get to spend a lot of time and explore all different avenues of this character. You really get to inhabit this person in this world. And I think that's appealing to some people too. I really do think it comes down to the actor. And I mean, we're very lucky that we have the cast that we do, because they're all so good on this show.
Yes, I can imagine. You know, you're on a talk show essentially called Binge, and we named it Binge a few years ago because at the time it really was the advent of streaming and original content, and you would binge a bunch of shows. But lately, it seems like the streamers have figured out that weekly episodic drops make more sense. How do you feel about that term?
You know, when binging was kind of in its heyday, I loved it just because, you know, I don't have any self-control when it comes to TV. I'll watch, I'll stay up and watch 18 hours of TV. But on the creator side, I do love going to week because it's so nice to have like the feeling of a water cooler conversation happening again, you know, like I love that every week people have time to like digest the episode, talk about their theories, like talk about what was so fun. Like it just becomes part of like the fabric of your social life, and it becomes conversation. And for something like Marvel, where, you know, every little detail is scrutinized and there's so much speculation, and also for me, the most rewarding thing is seeing what memes come out of each episode.
That is the ultimate compliment, isn't it? I guess the which GIF is going to go universal.
Totally. And it's so fun when you're making the show that like you really have no idea like what's going to hit, you know, and that's why it's just so fun to see what people glom onto.
That's hilarious. I can imagine being on set and thinking, maybe this is it, maybe not. We'll find out in 8 months.
That's absolutely what happens.
Let me ask you about yourself. You've had experience writing for all kinds of properties, Nickelodeon, HBO, obviously now Disney Plus. Can you choose a favorite child? I mean, have you had enough sampling yet to say, I kind of like culturally what these guys do over this other entity?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I do still just really love hard comedies, you know, and I love writing for adults. I started out writing for kids, but have like the first 6 years of my career. But moving out of that, I do like writing for adults just because I get to really write about the themes that kind of matter to me and really put a lot of like my life experience into things. I think up to this point, I would say like She-Hulk is the proudest thing that I've ever worked on. Definitely. Like it's my proudest piece of work.
And I know you've talked about, we got the Emmys coming up in September, but I know you've talked about sort of, in this era where we sort of question the value of awards, what an impact it had on your own career trajectory, right?
Yes. It really does make a difference for the person on the receiving end. It changes the way, like whether or not it's justified, it changes the way people think about you professionally, because you do have some sort of validation for it. And so it does mean something to like, buyers and producers, executives. So, it becomes this kind of marker that, you've reached a certain like echelon of people wanting to work with you.
Right. As for the series, I think as we're speaking, we've had one episode drop. Can you just how do you want viewers to think about the arc as it's going to come to us in the next couple of months?
I think of the entire first season as her true origin story. In the first episode, we obviously saw like her physical origin story, but the thematic arc of this first season is really the like emotional and mental origin story of this woman, Jen Walters, becoming and accepting and figuring out how to fit She-Hulk into her life.
We're so excited for you. Congratulations, of course, on all of this, and we look forward to a lot more. Jessica, thanks for the time. Good to see you as always.
Thank you so much for having me.
Jessica Gao, creator, head writer, and EP of She-Hulk Attorney at Law. As we said, new episodes Thursdays on Disney+.